Hello, my name is Kurt Rohloff. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Duality Technologies, a venture-backed technology startup focused on commercializing privacy tech, but also bringing this technology to the commercial industry for use of unlocking value of data. With me is Admiral Mike Rogers, former director of the NSA, including several other very senior positions in U.S. government, who we're very happy to announce has recently joined Duality's advisory board. So, Mike, thank you very much for joining me. Hi.
No, it's I who thank you.
So, if you don't mind, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. So, my name's Mike Rogers. I am a retired four-star Navy admiral. I've been out of the Navy about coming up on 5 years now. I spent 37 years in uniform. I tended to focus on cyber and intelligence associated things. Ended my career for a little over 4 years as a four-star as the commander of USCYBERCOM and the director of the National Security Agency. So cyber a core mission area in those two organizations. And for much of my career of that 37 years, I'm very focused on cybersecurity in particular. How do we defend systems? How do you defend data? How do you ensure privacy, compliance with federal and state and international regulations? Those are all always areas of concern and interest to me in my previous life, which was one of the reasons why I thought duality was something I was interested in.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And to kind of, ask a couple questions about your background a little bit. Obviously, given your position as a uniformed officer, obviously you have a major national security focus. Can you explain how you're interested not just in government, per se security, but also how that would expand into the private realm, for example, both industry and us as citizens?
Sure. So when I was in the government, I was focused on cyber and cybersecurity being a significant portion of the duties of the organizations. And the interesting thing to me always was one of the takeaways from that experience as I was trying to defend government, particularly DoD networks and data, as well as our weapon systems and some unauthorized access to our platforms. I quickly came to the conclusion that number one, the private sector is going to be core in the government's ability to do that. Both because, look, it doesn't matter if you're in the government or the private sector, literally almost everyone in the world is using commercially based solutions to both operate and defend their networks as well as maximize the value of their data. So when I was in government, I was spending a lot of time with the private sector, trying to look at opportunities, tools, capabilities, insights that we could use in the Department of Defense from a cybersecurity perspective. And so as I transitioned from government to the private sector, I was very interested in how could I get involved in those mission areas, but do it now for the private sector instead of as I had done for so long in the government.
Great. No, thank you very much. One thing that I'm really proud of for Duality is our background in government S&T, government technology development, coming out of DARPA. And one of the things that we've tried to balance is how we both very proud of our legacy coming out of DARPA, how we are familiar with some of the government needs associated with cybersecurity and data sharing, but how we're getting traction in the commercial space. And what we found is as we get more traction in the commercial space, government gets even more assured, more interested in what we have at higher technology readiness levels. This is just one tiny little data point, and I'm sure you had a much broader view of this. How do you see about the public-private partnership and technology development, technology maturation, and particularly adoption for operational production use, whether it's government or private sector?
Yeah, so in the perfect world, though, we got to do a better job about making this a two-way street.
Yeah.
Historically, it tended to be government going to the private sector saying, hey, what can we access? What can we buy? What can you help us with? And the government tended to focus on sharing information while it created regulatory and compliance frameworks with respect to cybersecurity, data privacy, et cetera. And I thought, not that those are bad, but I thought if we're going to really maximize value here, this is about how we ensure insight, capability, technical development, new ways of doing business. How are they shared back and forth? I mean, I think you're seeing that in Ukraine, for example, which is one of the reasons why they are proving to be so much more resilient in the face of some really high levels of attempts to penetrate their systems. They've achieved a pretty high level of resilience. In fact, to me, in part because they've managed to transition to much more of a two-way model here that brings together both the government and the private sector. Because I'm the first to acknowledge, I was very proud of everyone on the team that I was a part of in government. I thought we had some great strengths, but I also thought there were some areas where the commercial sector was just going to be far superior and, quite frankly, also had greater capacity. I thought, look, if I can access the insights and knowledge of a broad number of companies out there, that's so much more effective, efficient, and quite frankly, gives you a lot more capacity than just our own workforce. As good as that workforce was and as proud of them as I was and still am to this day.
So let's turn this a little bit into privacy and kind of the needs for privacy, both in society at large, government, civilian, and otherwise, if there is such an otherwise. One of the things that we see emerging that's driving some of Duality's business is the emergence of privacy regulations, privacy laws, privacy standards, both in the US, both federal and across the various states and internationally, actually, for that matter. The world is flat, as we've been saying for decades now in interactions. What do you see as driving the need for, or driving the desire for privacy regulations, at least initially, and what do you see as driving it going forward?
Yeah, so I think clearly there is a broad societal imperative to ensure the privacy of individuals, their activities, their data, the commercial transactions that they do, how, what they look for out there. And governments are reflecting that. Governments are aware that their citizens have concerns here and their citizens have a strong desire that privacy be addressed as something very foundational. Foundational in the sense that, hey, look, there should be a regulatory or legal or compliance framework. And that's what governments do. Governments generate that kind of thing. It's interesting to watch in Europe, which has probably been the most aggressive, certainly was the first major area in the world to come up with privacy legislation that applied across a large number of nations and had a global impact. You've seen other nations subsequently develop their own legislation. There's some interesting things in China and other areas, for example. But it's also been interesting to look at the way this has not played out in the United States. So far in the US, we have not been able to achieve a broad consensus at the federal or congressional level as to what the components of effective privacy legislation should be. In the absence of federal legislation, in the US, what you've seen is individual states, California and CPRA probably being the most visible or well-known. In the absence of federal legislation, individual states trying to enact legislation. My concern about that approach is if I'm a company and I'm going, so let me understand, you want me to potentially comply with 50 different privacy and regulatory regimes in the United States? So what I wish and what I hope to see is, can't we come together with some fundamental principles that we can use to create a legislative, or legal or policy framework with respect to privacy that can apply across the United States? So we get a common baseline, both for companies as individuals. The current approach is less than optimal to me because it's very fragmented.
Yeah, no, I am often reminded, the growth of privacy law is kind of like the growth of, environmental regulations, almost like this two-tier solution. There's the federal and then there's California, which, a lot of states have adopted California. And I sometimes wonder about this, so to speak, balkanization of privacy regulations, both internationally and across the country, the US, the United States. So good point.
So hopefully we'll get it. But it also goes back to, look, in the US, we traditionally have a strong aversion. It has nothing to do with parties, just based on our history. We traditionally have broadly speaking, have a strong aversion to a very strong and deep government roles in private activities. We just historically, as a society, it's the way we were created 240 some odd years ago. Look, we said to ourselves, the government's not going to intrude on our rights as individuals. All of our legal documents, our foundational documents, for example, they don't start out by talking about the power of the state and the role of the government. They start out by talking about the rights of the individual. And then they further go into, and those rights cannot be trampled or overridden by the government in the name of some higher purpose, ensuring the power of the government, privacy, security, etc. So we've always had this tension in the US about what's the right role of government, not just in this issue, but in a whole lot of others. Throw on
Right.
top of that, then technology has proceeded as it normally does, so much faster than the legal and regulatory frameworks that governments use to address it. And we just have had this big time lag in the US.
Right. No, I think you actually make a good point about American society and American political thought. Given balancing the rights and the needs of the individual against what I might broadly frame as communal goodness, so to speak. Like what is good for the betterment of society that balances against the individual. And I think actually privacy is a great example of this. About privacy is inherently driven by protecting individuals' right to be forgotten, or what do you actually want to say, or limiting the exposure of one's data. Well, the balance against that, the use of privacy technologies for individuals to act communally, to share their data, to do something that might, for example, help fight cancer, better grant making decisions at the federal government level, all different kinds of things where one can notionally help contribute to good communal action while also protecting one's rights as an individual. And I wonder if you might talk about that as privacy technology as a way of both not just protecting an individual, but also helping individuals work together for a communal good.
Yeah. I mean, look, the reality is we want to do both. In a perfect world, we want to be able to do both. We want to maximize security, privacy, and productivity, while we're also trying to ensure that we address the broader security and defense of the society as a whole. So there's always those imperatives, if you will, that are rubbing against each other in our system. And for governments, one of the challenges for them, I always thought, I was part of government for 37 years, was the government has this unique task, if you will, to provide for the defense and security. That's kind of their role. We don't do that collectively necessarily just as individuals. We task our government in our name to do that. And so government has this role in some ways that the rest of society doesn't. At the same time, government is also very much charged with, hey, you're the representative, so to speak, of the values and the desires of the citizens of this nation. Hey, you can't enact policies. You can't focus on security, defense, et cetera, without ensuring that you're addressing these other skills. That's the task we give our government. Hey, you've got to be able to maximize both these areas. And sometimes there's a rub between them. What might make sense from a security or defensive standpoint, hey, that really collides with my desire to ensure the privacy, the anonymity, and my rights as an individual. That's not something new. I think it's always going to be there. The challenge is, how do you try to find solutions? But also, quite frankly, we need to work collaboratively. One of the frustrations in our society, to me, is at times we're very divided at the moment, speaking about America. And so a lot of times we're just talking past each other and we're not really listening to each other. Government bad. Oh, but these individuals who are obsessed with privacy, they don't understand the needs of ensuring the safety and security of our society, that there's a lot of nations and individuals out there who want to use these technologies to do bad things. And it's not that one is right and one is wrong. It's that, guys, got it. We've each established our initial positions. Now let's figure out how we work together to try to maximize the ability to meet both of those desired end states, realizing sometimes one is going to be more important than another. Now, the nice thing is, which is, again, one of the things that attracted me to duality, was where you can find technology or solutions that enable you to do both. I'm like, man, that's a winner. That's the kind of thing we need to be focusing on.
This is a great segue, Mike. And maybe we should then talk about, so privacy is good. Privacy is also, for all these various reasons that you brought up related to American political thought and the rights of the individual and onward. What role do you see as advanced technology, particularly advanced privacy technology, playing in helping us as a society, both as citizens and voters who have a participation in government, how do we try to find this optimal middle path using advanced technology going forward? And I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
So clearly technology is going to be an important component of the solution set, because technology gives you potentially increased confidence in a solution, and technology also lets you scale. Because part of the challenge here is, look, we got to come up with solutions that scale across a massive environment. We can't come up with solutions that work for one particular sector. Now, when we're talking about privacy now, well, it works for one particular sector, but it doesn't work for another. Or, hey, look, the answer is we got to come up with 15 different approaches to doing this. So I think technology is a bit of an equalizer here. It tends to hopefully help to create a common base.
So, what we've seen, and I've seen this as a technology CTO, is that growth of privacy technologies and companies that both large and small offering privacy technology solutions has basically exploded over the past small number of years. You're a very well-known individual. You're very well-known in this space. You have quite a legacy and background. Sure, you get requests to be on advisory boards endlessly, probably every 5 minutes for all I know. Can you tell me a little bit about why you chose Duality, what you see in the company, what you see in our solution, what you see in the team, and everything else?
The first thing was the company's DNA, its legacy. It sprang up as part of the broader teammate family of organizations, if you will. And I had been affiliated and working with teammate literally since I got out of the military. I thought they had broad solutions against tough problems, cybersecurity focus, because I refused to get involved in offensive cyber activities in the private sector. My view is, hey, that is not an appropriate role for the private sector. I won't have anything to do with it. So in terms of an interesting problem set within the realm of cybersecurity, one of the things I was wondering was, is there a way to apply technology in a way that increased the ability to both access data while simultaneously increasing the level of protection associated with it? And as that was the problems that I was thinking of in my mind based on my previous service, trying to meet those kinds of challenges in the government. And when I saw Duality, I thought, interesting problem set, very relevant problem set. And I really thought that the technical approach that I saw was really interesting. What finally tipped the balance for me, so to speak, was the people. I owe anything that I do, I always say, look, before we get into anything, I want to understand your mission. I want to understand your culture. I want to understand your technical solution. And then perhaps most importantly, I want to sit down with your people. I want to understand them as individuals. And I want to make sure that the ethos and values of the organization align with my own. I won't do anything just for the sake of money. I got zero. It's probably why I spent 37 years in the military. The monetary aspect of life, I'm not saying it's not an element. I don't mean to imply that, but it has never been the biggest driver in my life. There's other things that for me are more important, even as I want to try to provide for my family and my future, don't get me wrong. And I just really liked the people and the culture and the technical solution that Duality had for what I thought was a really important, very relevant, and very interesting problem set.
Well, Mike, we all greatly appreciate your confidence and the kind words. We do take it to heart. Yeah.
We're going to do some good things. That motivates me. I love doing good things.
Sure thing. So what do you see as the future of privacy technologies as you've kind of been looking out at the field, both for, I've particularly focused on data collaboration and whatnot. What do you see as a future? What should either technology buyers or technology providers be paying attention to, do you think?
So clearly the economic models of today and the future are in no small part, almost regardless of sector or size of organization, are built around the idea of how do I maximize the value of data? How do I use data as a source of insight and knowledge? How do I use data to generate competitive advantage? How do I use data to help me get to a scale that I wouldn't be able to achieve without it? So as I look at problem sets, I'm going, look, so almost everybody is interested in maximizing the value of data. At the same time, if you're going to build models dependent on data, then access, privacy, compliance, confidentiality, those are all concepts that become incredibly important. Because you don't want to build models around data in which, boy, security is poor, There's limited, if any, privacy. Confidentiality can't be assured. And oh, by the way, we're not complying with regulatory or legal frameworks. That is not the way to build a solution set for how you're going to maximize the value of data. So I always thought that the best thing to do was, how can you come up with technical as well as organizational applications, but how can you come up with the technical solutions that enable you to maximize collaboration and the manipulation or study of data to generate value? And if you can come up with tools that enable you to do that while at the same time ensuring, privacy, confidentiality, and compliance with regulatory regimes, you got a winner. And part of the challenge, which goes really to duality in many ways, part of the challenge has been, hey, look, how do I do this in a way that it works both with data at rest, data in movement, and enables me to simultaneously collaborate with the same data across multiple elements, whether it's internal within an organization or it's external. Those things make the problem more complicated. But they're key to an effective solution. If you can't do that, then you can't maximize value.
For sure. Point well made. Yeah. Is there anything in particular that you would like me to ask you, or you would like to talk about? Again, given what we talked or haven't talked about so far.
Oh, probably. One of the things that interests me is this is a problem set that doesn't recognize geographic boundaries.
Right.
And so we got to come up with solutions for these problem sets, to me, that transcend individual nations or individual regulatory frameworks. Because increasingly, as business is more and more integrated globally, we're talking about, hey, I need to access and collaborate with data sets that are spread all over the world, and that different individuals who are working in different parts of the world can access and work simultaneously and work collaboratively. So I was always struck by, just as cyber doesn't recognize geographic boundaries as a whole, our network structures broadly, and the way we've created this global telecommunications and IT backbone. We also got to come up with solutions with respect to data collaboration, data privacy, data security. We got to come up with solutions that enable us to maximize productivity across nations and wide geographic dispersions.
So maybe this is actually maybe a really nice statement, and it also kind of brings up another question, because this is something that we track all the time at Duality. What kind of frameworks and what kind of justifications and motivation, not that we need justification, but what kind of regulatory compliance do we need when we need to span geographies? And something in particular that we've been watching super closely is this entire US-UK initiative, and more recently, this US-EU Shield set of regulations that just came out very recently. The US-UK initiative is between White House, Census, Commerce, and similar organizations in the UK as a bit of a sandbox activity. And this Privacy Shield, which of course President Biden has recently been pushing for interactions between US and EU on data sharing. I wonder if you might comment about the various kind of momentum that's kind of going forward internationally to help get everyone lined up for how to foster interaction. Yeah. And what do you think has the right chances? Is it going to be a groundswell of just banks wanting to work together, so commerce is going to drive regulation? Or do you think it's going to be more of a top-down, Department of Commerce or EU creating some sort of framework and then people fitting into that? Or is it going to be meet in the middle? Or how do you see that potentially going forward?
Yeah. So my sense would be, first, it's very positive to me that there's a recognition that we need to come up with solutions that integrate the viewpoints and the regulatory frameworks of multiple nations. That creating all of these individuals unique approaches, that just doesn't optimize productivity. It just doesn't optimize speed or efficiency. And it creates problems at times for, okay, how am I actually going to implement this? If I got one set of requirements, I got to meet here. I got another set of requirements, I got to meet there. And for some companies, that might be based in one nationality, but do a majority of their business somewhere else. or their business model is very, transnational. We've got to come up with solution sets that work. My sense is we're probably going to start in some particular sectors. Finance probably is going to be the first one in my mind, in part because there's just broad acceptance that finance is a global model. And so governments have for a long time built regulatory policy and legal frameworks around this idea that, well, finance is something that tends to transcend national boundaries and to maximize productivity and efficiency and ensure economic growth. Hey, we got to come up with solutions that recognize that and account for that. So my inclination is to think that we'll probably start there. Then I'd like to see, how can we expand? It's interesting, though. We got to acknowledge there are some differences. For example, the U.S. could have just said 5 years ago, hey, we're going to just adopt the GDPR framework. It's established, we're just going to take it. Now, the U.S. felt, from a government perspective, hey, there's some aspects of it that we don't necessarily agree with, that we wouldn't choose to implement the same way. And so the decision was made, look, we're not just going to uniformly adopt that. And in fact, the reality is at the moment, there is no single global standard or regulatory or compliance framework with respect to data security and privacy. It doesn't exist yet. Now, maybe at some point in the future, I don't see that. I don't see us coming to a global standard in the immediate near term, unless it's amazing what trauma. If we have some significant event or series of events that highlight the importance of this problem and the current shortfalls we have in terms of the legal and regulatory frameworks, that often tends to be an accelerant, but it hasn't so far anyway.
Yeah, you're right. Thank goodness in some regards because of that, that there hasn't been some significant trauma driving this.
Yeah, knock on wood.
Yeah. At the same time, I've always been a fan of, particularly relating to standards and whatnot, of something like the IETF model. And this is kind of like the old internet style.
I was going to say, that's how we started internet governance. So.
Yeah, working solutions drive, what people adopt, and maybe this is exactly what you're saying with financial, interoperability is, hey, banks need to collaborate, they need to fight fraud, they need to fight money laundering, they have all these kinds of directives, and so they got to come up with a solution. Whatever solution they have that protects privacy is probably going to, grow into a broader set of standards for what it is. So.
Yeah, so that could be really interesting. I think you make a really good point. The way we work, when we were looking at the early days of the World Wide Web in particular, as the internet shifted to the World Wide Web, we came up with this idea of you create capability, you take it to a standards body, and then a standards body reviews it and ultimately decides to adopt it. Then it starts to have a global basis. Might that be a way to do this?
Right on. First off, on behalf of Duality, from myself, thank you very, very much for your time. We're all very, very excited to have you on our advisory board. And I appreciate the conversation. And I'm sure we'll have many more, not recorded and talking about the future of privacy technologies as we go about our business and try to change the world together.
Yeah, no, Kurt, thanks very, very much. Hey, it's always great to get to talk to you. And it's an honor to be part of the team. And I look forward to what Duality can do, but also what we can do to help address this idea of, hey, look, we got to enhance data, we got to enhance collaboration, we got to do it in a framework that also gives us high confidence from a privacy, confidentiality, and a regulatory framework. And I look forward to that because that's a definite need out there. But hey, have a great day. It's good talking to you.
Oh, good. Take care.
Thanks, Greg.